As a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the most disturbing song is not If You Could Hide to Kolob. It is a children's song called Follow the Prophet, and a well-meaning person wanting to make children's music that encourage people to follow God through his prophets wrote this song. However, the song repeats the same line so many times that it literally makes us members of the church sound like we're brainwashing each other, or we're brainwashing the children. I personally think the song needs to go bye-bye. That's okay. Some person meant well when they wrote it, but it's too weird. It's too weird just because it says that line like 20 times in the song, Follow the Prophet. And it's bad PR for the church. It makes us look bad, which is not a good thing. But this leads me on to the next point I'm going to make, which is, does having a prophet allow us to not need to use our own brain or our own conscience or our own revelation with God? Does a prophet replace having a brain, having a conscience, and having a relationship with God? And most members of the church would say, of course no, of course it doesn't. Some members of the church seem to have that expectation, and it usually gets them into trouble as soon as they run into any sort of ex-Mormon, anti-Mormon material. Let me explain something that I think will be helpful to you if you are a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which has been helpful to me. This is that prophets are not omniscient. Presidents of the church do not know everything. They do not always make all the right decisions. And revelation is a imperfect process. I'm going to tell you the theory behind this, and I'm going to tell you a story. It's a story from history, something that happened with Joseph Smith. And it illustrates the point that I'm going to make. So here's the principle first. When we ask God for wisdom, for knowledge, for understanding, God speaks to our minds, to our spirits. And that information passes from our spirits to our minds. And somewhere in the process of it going into our mind, it is encoded into language. And language itself is extremely imperfect. It is horribly tainted and subject to all kinds of bias and change, and many challenges occur. The process of some information going from the spirit to language in our minds. Then there's the obstacle of knowing, okay, did this come from God? Did this come from my own mind? Or did this come from the adversary? Which, for people, especially people who are inexperienced with this, but for anyone trying to seek this, is another obstacle. And then there's another obstacle where the human mind will alter things. Maybe some part of our human bias almost like acts like a filter to block out some of the inspiration. Or, like a muddy river, things are added to it. Like a pure stream of water mixing with a larger muddy river. And that muddy river represents our own inadequacies, our own biases, our own, predetermined ideas. And this can influence and impact and prevent us from receiving things or taint the things that are received. So at one point in time, to illustrate this point, early on, I recognized Joseph Smith as quite young. And he has a revelation that the saints need to go and sell the Book of Mormon. And they go off and they try to do that. It doesn't work out. And then the Lord provides another means for them to have the money that they needed to organize the church. And then someone comes back to Joseph Smith and they're like, why did the Lord tell us to sell the Book of Mormon and then it didn't end up working out? Like, what happened there? So Joseph Smith went and he prayed about it and he asked, what happened there? And the Lord told him that some revelations are from God. Some revelations are the product of people's minds, and some revelations are from the adversary. And I might add to that, I would say every revelation, especially if it's spoken in words, which tends to be all of them, is going to be a mixture of human error and inspiration. Why human error? Because language itself is error. It is so subjective and tainted. Just the act of someone speaking it, someone else hearing it, adds unbelievable amounts of taint. And this is the nature of language. You make a noise, I hear the noise, two people hear the noise, and they think totally different things based on what they hear. And that's just acting as if language is the only aspect of how it gets tainted. So, if you think that every single revelation that's received is always going to be perfect, I think you'll be disappointed. I think some get through more pure than others. They get less taint, or less bits of inspiration are filtered through the human mind than others. But I think all of them, because they're all in words, have some degree of taint. The person who receives the revelation is much like a vessel, like a bowl. And if the bowl is filthy, then the contents of the bowl will be filthy as well. And so the president of the church, who has the responsibility and stewardship to receive revelation for the church, has a stewardship and responsibility to keep himself pure, to keep his mind pure. And to the degree that he's able to do that, it will better enable him to be able to receive revelation for the church. Now, for me, it seems pretty obvious that this is an extremely difficult task. And some people are very willing and eager to just criticize and rip apart and evil speak towards and put down the leaders of the church. In my opinion, that's to their own condemnation. We can recognize that they're doing the best that they can, that what they're called to do is ridiculously difficult. They are very, very wise. They're put in this position by prophecy, by the laying out of hands, by those who are in authority. They're called by God. This does not make them infallible or perfect. They do not deserve our ridicule. They deserve our support and to be sustained in the difficult and very life-consuming and challenging calling that they have. I think it's wise to follow what they say, but God also expects us to use our own brains, and God expects us to use our own conscience and to have a relationship with God directly. And I would say if you think that you know better than the prophet, you're probably wrong. But if you're not using your own brain and your own conscience and your own relationship with God to even interpret and try to understand what the prophet is saying, you're probably wrong for that reason alone. Has the prophet been wrong? Yes. Will the prophet be mistaken again? I'm sure. You're probably going to be better off for just following what he says anyways, though. But you still need to use the brain that you have. You still need to use your relationship with God, and you still need to use your conscience of what's right and wrong. And so people have asked me, would you ever, do what the prophet said? The prophet said to do something really horrible and bad, like go out and unalive a bunch of people or something. No, I wouldn't. I'm not going to do anything that is wrong. I'm just not. And unaliving a bunch of people is wrong. I'm not going to do that. God gave me a brain and he gave me a conscience, and I have a relationship with God. And if the prophet told me to do something that I felt was, on all three of those levels not right, I wouldn't do it. And I wouldn't blame someone else for not doing it either. Now, for me personally, I've never had the prophet ask me to do anything or give me any counsel that has ever been in contradiction to my own conscience. However, I consider myself fortunate in that regard, because in the early church history, that was often not the case. Was that an error of Joseph Smith? Maybe. I didn't know Joseph Smith personally. I wasn't alive during his day. I believe he was a prophet of God, but I don't believe he was infallible or perfect. And I think he would have been the first one to tell me that. Anyway, this is a tough message, but hopefully it's helpful to someone.